All right, I'm going to have a bit of a rant about squat depth because it seems that the degree of variation in the understanding of what appropriate squat depth is for powerlifting competition is absolutely fucked. So it's worth having a discussion and checking out what squat depth actually is. So where we're going to start with this is actually looking at what is asked of us in the rule books. So, going to have a look at a few things here. Start off with IPF. IPF, the rule is for a red light. Um, Failure to bend the knees and lower the body until the top surface of the legs at the hip joint is lower than the top of the knees. So that's very similar. I've got APL's one here. Failure to bend the knees and lower the body until the top surface of the legs at the hip joint is lower than the top of the knees. Saying pretty much the same thing. Uh, we got next GPC. Where are we? GPC. The lifter must bend the knees and lower the body until the top surface of the legs at the hip joint is lower than the top of the knees. So all pretty much the same so far. What have we got next? WRPF. Failure to flex the knees and hips to lower the body until the uppermost part of the hip joint, which is an interesting word to use. The uppermost part of the hip joint is positioned beneath the top of the knee. I like that in terms of a description. I think that's pretty good, to be honest. It makes the hip joint part of the conversation a little bit clearer. But those four are pretty much all saying the exact same thing. You'll notice when discussing squat depth with people, the word hip crease pops up from time to time, and that really doesn't exist in any rule book. The word crease, um, except for one, and we're going to have a look at that now. This is an interesting. This starts a very interesting new conversation. So this is US APL's rulebook. Upon receiving the Chiefs referee squat signal, the lifter must bend the knees and lower the body until the top anterior surface of the legs at the hip joint. Now, this is where it's interesting. It says anatomically defined as the inguinal crease depicted in figure one, which I've got here. Shit picture, but it does begin to, it references hip crease, but it defines what they're saying as the hip crease, as the inguinal crease. Um, so that this adds another layer of context, which I think is really interesting. Um, let's define what the inguinal crease is. I took this photo of myself just before and photoshopped some circles on it. The inguinal crease is this area here that we can see. So I do like that USAPL defines the hip joint as anatomically the inguinal crease. I think that's really important. But moving into what I think is the best rule book in terms of how it defines and describes squat depth, I still think USPA is the best rule book for squat depth. So it says the exact same thing as all the others. Upon receiving the head referee signal, the lifter must bend the knees and lower the body until the top surface of the legs at the hip joint is lower than the top of the knees. It's exactly the same as IPF, GPC, all the others. Say all the same. But where they hit the nail on the head, in my opinion, is this image in the rulebook. So they've actually marked in chalk on the soft suit, which of course soft suits can move around and stuff like that. But for a visual representation, I think it's fantastic. And what they've done, outlined in chalk, is the inguinal crease. And so there they are saying that the hip joint in their description is the top part of the inguinal crease. And that's what US APL is saying, and I believe that's what the rest of the rule books are saying as well when they reference the hip joint. Um, this is just a conversation. I'm not going to look at any squat examples. We don't need to. We know what's a high fucking squat. We know what's a really deep squat. Um, the next thing is really how you go about judging this. Now, again, the best way to judge squat depth that I heard or learnt was you watch where they initiate the squat, and that gives you the pivot point of the hip joint or the top part of the inguinal crease, and then you just eyeball that as they descend in line with the top of the knee, and that's it. The confusion about hip crease when the word hip crease is thrown around is that if someone has a lot of upper leg mass and anterior torso mass, the crease is formed extremely early and extremely pronounced. And that's not what we're discussing. We're talking about the inguinal crease. We're not talking about uh, skin folds forming. So just to be clear on that, um, pretty much, like I said, this isn't a conversation of judging squat depth necessarily. This is a conversation about uh, showing what all the rule books actually ask and trying to interpret what they all mean, because all of them say the same thing, and we seem to get judged very differently in all these federation. We see it online all the time. Squats just being significantly different, but all the rule books say exactly the same thing. So, is this a cultural thing? Is this what a how can something that says the exact same thing almost word for word in the majority of rule books be interpreted so differently? So I don't know the answer for that. All I know is if you compete at a competition, you should read the rule book, you should understand what squat depth is, and you should train to the appropriate squat depth. That's it.